Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 1634 and today's date is August 9th, 2018, and the title of the episode is Rothschild Just Revealed the Plan and Placed the Blame. Let's get into the economic collapse financial news. Now, as we know, the government companies, they like to change statistics or leave things out if things aren't going their way. And when we start to look at used cars, when we look at new cars, and we start to look at the entire thing, we start to realize that things aren't making sense, and that's because things are left out or the calculations have changed. Now, the Consumer Price Index for used cars and trucks, it shows that there's been 0% inflation since 1994 in used cars and trucks, despite actual prices having soared. So yes, the CPI for used vehicles in June, as reported by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, fell 0.7% from June a year ago and is where it had been in April of 1994. Now, let's think about this for a second. We've had 0% inflation since 94. How did they get these numbers? Well, it looks like they used hedonic quality adjustment. So the question is, what is this? Well, in price index methodology, hedonic quality adjustment has come to mean the practice of decomposing an item into its constituent characteristics, obtaining estimates of the value of the utility derived from each characteristics, and using those value estimates to adjust prices when the quality of good changes. So this is what the BLS is doing to change the inflation calculations. Now, of course, as we know, car prices have been moving up, not down. And just like with every other item, we've seen them move up. It's costing more and more to purchase a car. Now, what's also very interesting about the automobile industry, we used to calculate, the deliveries of the automobiles. But now we see that GM stopped reporting its deliveries in April. And GM accounts for over 17% of all new vehicle market. And as of April, the industry has to fill that hole with estimates. So now they're estimating the deliveries of these new vehicles. Now, the new vehicle market, in terms of the number of deliveries, peaked in 2016 and declined in 2017. The early part of this year was slightly stronger, but now the market is losing steam again, as more and more consumers, including many subprime borrowers that are getting locked out of the new vehicle market, switch to used vehicles. And what we're seeing right now is that GM, Fiat Chrysler, Ford, and all of them, well, it seems like everything's declining all at once. And we haven't seen this since the financial crisis. Now, of course, what they're doing is they're changing calculations, they're hiding information, and they're trying to make it seem like everything is fantastic. But as we can see, it isn't. This reminds me of like the subprime securities, where the rating agencies were out there and they're telling us that the subprime securities are AAA. But when you actually look into it, you saw that people were defaulting. People weren't paying their mortgages. It was a lot of speculation. And we're starting to see that these corporations, they're starting to change the way they calculate, do business, how they provide the numbers, and they do this on purpose because they realize that the system's coming down, that they're not doing as well. And we saw this prior to 2008, and this is why the automobile industry had a major problem. They had a huge amount of debt. They were lying a lot about their numbers, and we're seeing this with many different corporations right now. And as we can see, this is all going to come down and it's going to crash really hard. We see that home buyers, they are choosing to wait it out. Now, this reminds me of the years of 2006, 2007, 2008, where all of a sudden people were waiting and they were watching. And the prices now have gone up to a certain point, actually a lot higher than they were back in 2006, 7, leading into 8. Now they're starting to fall. And people are starting to see this. So what they're doing is they're waiting on the sidelines. And they'll keep waiting. Also, since the interest rates are moving up, it's kicking a lot of people out of the market. So what they need to do is they need to wait for prices to come down, because as interest rates rise, they need those prices to come down so they can get back into the market. We're starting to see the same thing happen that we saw back in 2006, 7, and 8. Now, of course, we all know how that ended. So we're starting to see the same exact thing happen. And we're in the middle of the summer where a lot of people should have purchased their homes already. And we're seeing existing homes, new home sales, pending home sales. They are all declining and prices are starting to come down. And what that means is as prices fall, people are going to start taking their homes off the market. As people take their homes off the market, we're going to see traffic dry up. There's not going to be that many people out there looking. And of course, they're already saying that there's hardly any inventory out there. And if prices are continually coming down and people are taking their houses off the market, it's just going to get worse. This is what we saw prior to 2008. People put their houses up on the market. They were hoping to get the top dollar. Nobody was coming. And then they started to lower it. Nobody was coming. So they started to lower it a little bit more. Nobody was coming. And they said, you know something? This is ridiculous. I'm not going to sell the house right now because it's getting to the point where I'm going to break even and I need the down payment or whatever they were going to use to get into the next house. So they took the house off the market. And then the house prices continually fell over time and people started to go underwater. So they were definitely not going to sell. And some people had no choice because they were losing their jobs. So they had to short sale. And we're heading in that same exact direction now. And it's just going to get worse. The economy is really not improving. We've been following this for quite a while right now. And we've been watching the entire system completely fall apart. Even though the government, the Fed, and all the statistical information was telling us that everything was fantastic, we were watching the same patterns occur that we saw prior to 2008. I mean, really nothing has changed. Yes, they have the ability to manipulate, to print money, to change the interest rates, to change the calculation, but the same thing's going to happen. Yes, you can push it out, kick the can down the street, as people would say, each time, and hopefully everything works out. But it comes a period of time where you can't do this anymore. And we're at that point right now. People are starting to notice that there's something wrong. And this was the fault of the central bankers, because they're the ones who created this illusion to make us think that the economy is fantastic. And now it's falling apart. We see wholesale sales, they have slumped in June. Expectations were for a 0.2% rise in June after a 2.5% gain in May, but the entire curve dropped with a 0.1% drop in June after a revised lower 2.1% gain in May. And once again, a lot of these numbers, all they're doing is revising, recalculating, manipulating to make you think that things are really going well when they're really not. And they've done this in the past, and they continue to do this. Now, as we know, the Fed has changed the calculation of the yield curve. And we can see why they've done this, because what is happening right now is the same thing that happened in the past, where every time the yield curve inverts, it gives us an indicator that we're heading into a recession. And we saw this back in 2008. We saw this back in 2001. We saw it almost every single time that we had a recession. And we're headed to that area once again. And when we look at a graph, we can see the pattern is exactly the same. And of course, what the central bankers want to do, they don't want you to know what is happening. They want to change the data, hide data, and make sure you don't understand what's going on here. But we've just heard from Lord Rothschild. He is saying that the New World Order is at risk. And he pretty much laid out what they're about to do with the global economy. Now remember, they know, because they're the ones who created all this, that their system only lasts for a certain period of time. And they were hoping that they were going to cover all this up with an event like war. This way they can say, hey, listen, we're in a war. Everyone has to sacrifice. We can't get the supplies to the stores. Credit's freezing up right now, and everyone has to tighten their belts. And it's because of the war. We don't have a war right now. So they have to come up with some other type of excuse. So right now, we're hearing from the Rothschild family. from RIT Capital Partners in their 2014 annual report. Now, back then, the Rothschild family warned that the geopolitical situation is most dangerous since World War II. And then Jacob Rothschild came out in August of 2017. He cautioned that share prices have in many cases risen to unprecedented levels at a time when economic growth is by no means assured. He also made another warning, which the market has so far ignored. The period of monetary accommodation may well be coming to an end. Now, fast forward to today, when in the latest half-year commentary from the RIT Capital Partners, Rothschild has made his latest warning to date, this time focusing on the global economic system that was established after World War II and which he believes is now in jeopardy. He pointed out to the U.S.-China trade war and the Eurozone crisis as the key problems putting economic order at risk and the lack of common approach. A reference to the gradual unwind of globalization in the wake of President Trump that has made cooperation today much more difficult. In 9/11 and in 2008 financial crisis, the powers of the world worked together with a common approach. Cooperation today is providing much more difficult. This puts at risk the post-war economic security order, he says. And he went on to say that we are now seeing some areas of weaker growth emerge. Indeed, the IMF has recently predicted some slowdown. We have the World Trade Organization. They're out there saying the same exact thing. The situation is extremely serious. Reciprocal trade restrictions cannot be the new normal. A continued escalation will risk a major economic impact hitting the poorest hardest. So Rothschild is out there. He's already told you the plan. They already placed the blame, and this will be blamed on Trump. They're trying to maneuver the narrative, and they're trying to convince everyone because of what Trump is doing, the system is going to come down. Well, he's partially right. The system is going to come down, but it's not because of what Trump is doing. What Trump is doing right now, he's setting the system up to allow it to survive after the central banking system collapses. The central bankers, they are worried right now because they realize that their entire system is about to implode and they cannot point the finger someplace else. They're going to try to point it at Trump, but we see there's other plans in the works. And we understand that both sides, they're trying to control the narrative. But we know the Rothschilds, we know the central banking system. We know they're the ones to blame for all of this. They're the ones who created all this. They're the ones who kept on printing. They're the ones who propped up the banks. They're the ones who lowered the interest rates. They're the ones who are hiding all the information from the people around the world. They're the ones who created this system. And if you go back in history, this system, what they've created, only lasts 40 to 45 years. And we're coming to the end now. They don't know what to do. Normally, they have an event. They don't have one now. So they're trying to figure out a way around this. And they're hitting roadblocks because they want to show the world that the U.S. economy is falling apart because what Trump is doing. But the U.S. economy, through statistical manipulation, it's showing that the economy is doing a lot better. Now, they're not going to come out and say, hey, they just manipulated the statistics, because all Trump needs to do is turn around and say, really? Let's see what you're doing. And all of a sudden, you have an audit. You have an audit bill, and they're not going to point that out. And they're also not going to point out the manipulation of statistics, because all Trump and the Patriots have to do is go back in time, and they'll just show all this manipulation up until this point. And all of a sudden, the Fed, prior administrations, it all comes down. People lose faith. The entire world implodes. And then you have riots and things like that. And they're trying to get around this. They don't want that to happen. I mean, if the central bankers were in charge and they had the narrative and everything was going the way they wanted and the person was in the White House that they wanted, yes, we might be headed in that direction. But now things are changing and the central bank is kind of stuck. This is their plan. It doesn't mean it's going to work because the deep state, the central bank, they all have plans. It doesn't mean they can follow through. And it looks like they're going to have a lot of trouble as we move forward because there's other plans going against them. And remember, everything that is being done right now is to weather the storm and to make sure the U.S. can survive once we get out of the central banking system. And this is why you see all these bilateral trade agreements being made outside of the normal channels because everything needs to be in place. And of course, with the UK wanting to leave the EU, with other countries looking at the same exact thing, the central bankers, they are scrambling now. Remember, their entire agenda was to have a one world government, one world currency system, which they controlled. They were going to be able to control all the countries. They were going to be able to enslave every single person in their system and make them work for peanuts, because they were going to make each country a third world type of country where you can just swap workers back and forth, where you could never get ahead. This was their entire plan, and it is falling apart right now. But one thing is for sure, as we can see, we need to come out of this system and move into a new system. And this is going to be very difficult for many. So be prepared. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.